Welcome to the Uncle's channel, thanks for watching today. Let's continue our series going through all the Mega Man games on the Game Boy, and today we're focusing on Mega Man Part 4, and honestly, this is an amazing game, and it really breaks the formula from the other games, and it really stands on its own. But I always like to start these reviews off by looking at the box art for the game. Now as we look at the box art, we got a pretty awesome cover here. We got Mega Man and Napalm Man in the front here, and Napalm Man's getting ready to ignite Mega Man, sort of like he's a villain from Home Alone. We got Chargeman in the background there, hidden behind the official Game Boy Game Pack sign. Pharaoh Man in the background as well. And of course this landscape here be Pharaoh Man's landscape because it all focuses on the desert aesthetic and pyramids and such. And we got Beat in the background. This is the first appearance of Beat throughout the entire Game Boy series, and he's going to be an awesome little helper we're going to buy. Dr. Wily, his castle in the background is a little spaceship. Honestly, this background represents the game perfectly. It's not as exciting as far as like the Mega Man 3 background because it doesn't have that cool snake and some of the aesthetics there, but it's still a really good background that represents the game very well. Now when you first load Mega Man 4 up, you're going to notice an immediate difference because this game doesn't just go to the title screen and stay there. We actually have a story for Mega Man 4. It's not the greatest story, but it's still a story, and it has some pretty good animation here too. Dr. Wily's little spaceship comes up here, throws out 4 of his robot masters to attack the city. They begin to attack the city, and of course, we get a little cutscene between Mega Man and Blade here as well. And Blade's a new character that's introduced into this game. That'll become more frequent in the series as the series continues. Now, when you start the game up, you do get to meet Dr. Light for the first time in the Game Boy series, which I know sounds weird, but he's actually not been in any of the Game Boy games. He was in NES, but this is his first appearance in the Game Boy games. And he's got a whole little system here. He offers us an opportunity to collect P-chips throughout the levels, and we can use those P-chips to purchase things from the store. This is the first time this is introduced into the series as well. And so this is actually a pretty huge step for the Mega Man series, because future Mega Man games, all the way to like Mega Man 11, is going to use this little chip system where you can buy upgrades like E-tanks and extra lives and things like that as you progress through the game. And it's actually a really, really helpful mechanic. And then we get to the boss selection screen here, and this is the only Mega Man game that I can think of that actually breaks the mold when it comes to boss selection. Every other Mega Man game has like the Brady Bunch, you know, background where you just simply choose your enemy you want to go to. But this one has an entire little enemy selection where when you click it, it actually slides to the next one, a little rotation going on here. It actually has a little image down at the bottom to represent the level that you're going to. This is actually really groundbreaking for not only the Mega Man series, but also the Game Boy in general. There are a few games that look this good on the Game Boy. So we start off with Toadman, and when you select Toadman, you're also going to notice a quick change here. You actually have a little animation for when you select a boss. It's a little bit different than the other games. But let's go ahead and get into Toadman stage. Now one of the first things you're going to notice here is Mega Man's charge shot is actually different in this game. Not only does it look different, when you shoot the charge shot, it actually knocks you backwards, not a lot, but just a little bit to show you how powerful that charge shot is. And it's sort of a neat feature. I can't say it really makes a huge difference in the game, except for you need to be a little bit more alert on it, but it's still sort of a neat factor that only this game has. Now the Toadman level itself, I'll acknowledge I don't remember the NES version super well, but I do know that the rain is pretty much the same here. A little water coming across the platform is the same. It's sort of neat that the Game Boy was able to accomplish that, but one thing that I do distinctly remember about the Toadman level were these giant snails, and of course they are back in all their glory on the Game Boy. Now when some of the other Mega Man games made their way over to the Game Boy, they actually had to sort of water down some of the graphics on these larger mini-bosses, but the snail, he looks just as good as he ever did, and I'm glad to see him back. Now after you defeat the giant snail, you also notice in this level, for the first time, there are actually collectibles to get. You actually collect all these different letters, and if you collect them all, you can actually get Beat as your little assistant here. You know, the little bird that comes around and helps you out by attacking the enemies. A huge help in the later levels especially, but it's just awesome there's actually a collectible in every one of these levels that if you don't get the first time, there's reason to go back and play the level again. But most of them are pretty easy to get the first time. And speaking of things to collect, those little P-chips we talked about earlier that you can use to buy things in Dr. Light's store, every time you kill an enemy just about, you get a P-chip, and it actually gives you a reason to want to kill pretty much every enemy in the level instead of just running past some of them. So it's actually another little thing to collect inside the game. Now when you get to Toadman himself, I've always loved the Toadman fight, and I do remember this on the NES. He has this perfect pattern here that if you just get close to him and you shoot him once and then slide, he'll jump over you. You shoot him once and slide, he'll jump over you. And you just do this constantly, and he never does his special move. It's like he sort of glitches into this little phase here, and he's one of the easiest bosses in all the Mega Man games because you can get him stuck in that little rotation. You haven't beat first try. Now anytime you beat a robot master in this game, not only do you get a cool little cutscene showing yourself getting the power, it actually shows you demonstrating the power as well. And it's just sort of neat to go ahead and know what the power does. It's just another little bell and whistle that Mega Man 4 tends to add into the Mega Man series. Now we've had a ton of positives so far, but we got to throw at least one negative in there. So let's take a look at the password system it reveals here. What even is this? The password system is completely revamped from any other Mega Man game before or after this one, and I can't figure out for the life of me why they would change it, especially to something that looked like this. Password system, not okay. Now, since we defeated our first boss, we also get our first opportunity to look inside the store here. And there's so many cool items to choose from. I mean, just look at all the options here. Some of them are going to, of course, give you E-tanks, some of them give you small E-tanks, some are going to give you opportunity to refill all your weapons. I mean, there's just so many cool weapons to choose from, and I love the idea of the P-chip system. Great idea for Mega Man 4. Next up is the Brightman stage, and I've always felt that this enemy looked a little silly, if we're being honest. But the stage itself is still a really fun stage. Now, when you start the stage off, I do remember this one pretty well from Mega Man 4, and the enemies are pretty much all the same inside this level, and especially when it comes to the lights off, lights on system. Very similar to the Shadow Man stage from the last game, and it's a neat little system here. Can't really say it's revolutionary. Like I said, it was in the last game. But mixing it up with different enemies, it at least has a little twist on it. And also in the Lightman stage, you have these little switches here. And when you click the switch on, it makes these little platforms appear. And you have to jump from one platform to the other. And it seems really easy, but I had a really hard time getting the hang of it. It took me multiple tries to finally understand how this little light system works. But once I finally got the hang of it, it wasn't too bad as it appeared later on in the level. But even that one wasn't really as annoying as the next gimmick that came around. We hop on this little bad guy here, and of course he sort of dips down to the right as you're standing on him. And of course when you jump off of him, he'll stop. And there's this little platform in the middle. If you hop on the platform full of all these items, you're pretty much trapped. You can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. You got the items, but you're going to have to die to get out of it. You actually have to ride the enemy underneath the platform and then jump off on the other side to get the items and then continue on. It's hard to know that your first time through, and you're almost certainly going to fall for the trap and end up losing a life. But there's something about these little Mega Man tricks. They're sort of like trolling you a little bit, like I mentioned in the other games, and you really can't help but to enjoy them, because you know the developers are having a laugh with you. Before we move on to the next part though, as you're riding that guy, just look how angry he is when you're on him, but as soon as you hop off of him, he's so chill. It's such a cool little enemy. Now it's also in this level that I start noticing in Mega Man 4 that health is way more plentiful than it was in the other games. It feels more like the traditional Mega Man when it comes to ample health opportunities to refill yourself, get yourself back on your feet a little bit, and it feels just more like a Mega Man game when it comes to that aspect. Now when you finally get to Lightman, he's a little bit of a rip-off of Flashman in that he sort of freezes the stage on you, and you're just sort of frozen there in air, and you're just a sitting target. Now, he's actually pretty tough. You just use your Mega Buster, and I had a lot of trouble with him. But if you use the Toad weapon, which is the last item you got, the Rainstorm, so easy to use, and you're going to actually use the Rainstorm a lot throughout the game, but this is the first opportunity to use it while you're frozen. You'll still be able to hit him, and you'll have him defeated in no time. Now, the next stage is one of my favorite stages in any of the Mega Man games, and that's Pharaoh's stage. This stage is just awesome. I mean, it has the whole ancient Egyptian feel to it, has some of the greatest enemies. It's got these little scorpions, these mummies, these little ladybugs, these little gnats. I mean, there's just so many amazing enemies in this stage, and the background and the scenery is just perfect. And I also like how they have like little platforms here that actually sort of shake and break down and shake and break down. You have to time it just right to slide into it. It breaks the game up a little bit, and that's what this game really does a lot, is they have so many little gimmicks to sort of break the game up. Some of them are a little bit hard to get a hold of or understand, like the Lightman stage, but at least they mix the gameplay up. And so this really is a very unique Mega Man game. When you find the letter in this stage, it's actually a little bit hard to get to. It's not impossible, and it's very clearly defined of where it's at, but you have to time your jumps just right in order to get it, and you only get one try unless you want to die to come back. So I actually like the way this letter is positioned a good bit better than some of the other ones. And then you come across the extra life trap here, where you're going to be able to get over there to get the extra life, but getting out is an entirely different story. And once again, I love these little traps that the game hides throughout. And then when you finally get to Pharaoh, man, for him to be a mummy, I mean, my gosh, he is fast. I mean, this is like the fastest enemy next to Quickman in the entire game. And once again, just like Quickman, you're going to use your power to freeze him. Use Brightman's little bright flash here. He freezes, you can start shooting him, and I love the animations of how he's moving every time you freeze him. He got some really awesome moves about him, but he's really easy once you freeze him, and it's just a fun boss battle. Next up is Ringman stage, and honestly, I always felt this was like such a lame enemy growing up, because I mean, his power is he can shoot a ring out, and he has a little ring on his head. I will acknowledge I didn't understand why the little Saturn planets were in the NES game until literally this playthrough. And I was like, oh, Saturn, the rings, that's why there's planets inside this level. It was one of those things that just went over my head as a kid. But this level as a whole, it's just not a lot of fun to me. I don't enjoy the little traps here, how the little platforms disappear as you're going across them. I never enjoyed that. I don't enjoy most of the enemies in this level. The aesthetic, I'm just not a huge fan of it. Now the mini boss in this level is going to look like a little slinky, and he shoots out the little rings at you. Once again, really falling into that ring mechanic. And I don't really like the mini boss here. He's nothing like the snail. Holy cow, the snail was awesome. But this is a really lame boss. And then you get to Ringman himself, and the only thing I'm going to really say about Ringman that's really good are his running animations, like the frame rate on that and the way he looks when he runs, just excellent. I love that. But if you use your Mega Buster super hard on this enemy, and if you use Pharaoh's power, It's still pretty hard. That's what he's weak against. But overall, Ringman is one of the tougher battles in the game, and I can't really say I like the level here or the boss for this particular one. And of course, at this point, you've collected all the different letters, and now you're going to get Beat, which is this awesome little bird who's going to follow you around when you have him out, and he's going to attack the enemies or attack the bosses. There's a great help, especially later on in the game, but I don't remember exactly where he appeared in the Mega Man NES series. I know it's sometime around 4, 5, or 6. I'm thinking it's 5 or 6. I'm not really sure, but it's a huge help. At this point, you've defeated the first 4 core robot bosses, and now you have a chance to select Dr. Wily before going into the next 4 bosses. Now, when you select him, you get this awesome looking cutscene here where Dr. Wily escapes into the forest, gets this giant little robot contraption he hides in, begins to shoot at these little missiles at you, and you have this like shootout scene. It's like an actual animation scene on the Game Boy between you and Dr. Wily, and it's just awesome looking. And then you, of course, you head into the forest, you get onto his giant contraption, and then you have a battle where you're actually on top of his contraption. The game is actually really good as far as like keeping up with the scenery to match the story, and considering the other ones didn't even have a story, that's a huge plus for this game. Now when you get on top of the tower here, you actually have a little tower fight, which is pretty awesome. Then you go in, you get to fight Blade, who's going to end up being an enemy throughout the game, sort of like an assistant to Dr. Wily a little bit, but he's sort of like your arch enemy, and we'll see if he has a change of heart toward the end of the game. But Blade is a fairly difficult boss here. You give him down to 1 health, and then he flees away in order for you to fight him again later. And then you encounter your next 4 robot bosses, and all 4 of these are going to be from the Mega Man 5 on the NES, where the other 4 are from Mega Man 4 on the NES. And these 4, when you select them, it has the same little rotation part here, but down at the bottom, it actually shows a zoomed in picture of them instead of the level that you're going to. And I don't have a problem with that. It's just like, why did they change it from the first 4 to the next 4? I really like consistency, and when they changed it, I'm just like, that's fine, but why? So we start the second half of the game off with Crystal Man, and Crystal Man is not really my favorite stage because it's somewhat forgettable, but it's not a bad stage in and of itself. The core enemy here are these little soldiers that shoot out these giant crystals at you, and they remind me a lot of the little skeletons from Skullman stage, maybe a recycled enemy, I'm not sure. They also have this other enemy, it's like a giant scrub that comes around and scrubs all the crystals, you know, a nice little cleaning one, and it reminds me so much of that cleaning spray. Scrubbing Bubbles is what I think it's called, but it reminds me so much of the mascot for that. I don't know if they took inspiration. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But outside of these 2 enemies, the enemies in this stage are either repeats or just sort of lame enemies. Not really my favorite when it comes to enemies. I will say though, this is the first stage in the entire game, and it keeps up for the entire second half of the game here, where they're actually branching off paths inside the level. And Mega Man's always done a straightforward linear path throughout the levels, so this is the first time in my knowledge that Mega Man actually ventured off and did multiple paths to choose from, and sometimes these paths lead off to extra lives or extra health, sometimes they lead off into hidden letters, and it's just neat to sort of see alternate paths to take inside the level. But as you're advancing through the level, you eventually get to this one part here where they have these platforms that you hop down here, and you have no idea that this platform is going to just simply disappear. And once it starts going down, you can't move, you can't get off of it. And it's like, it's so unfair. Like you hop down there, you don't know what to do, and then you're dead. And I just don't enjoy little traps like that. I don't mind traps where they try to trick you into getting like an item or something like that, but where they just sort of throw you out there and you have no idea what you're doing and they just kill you. I'm not a big fan of that. But it took me a few tries to get it down, but eventually you'll get where you can hop through all these little levels here. And honestly, the Crystal Man stage was probably like twice as long as any of the other stages in the entire game. And coupled that with sort of being a bland stage, despite having multiple paths you can take, is one of the more boring stages inside the game. Now when you get to Crystal Man himself, really not a lot to write home about him as either. A very standard boss here. Use the ring power, you have him defeated. Crystal Man is a fairly lame boss. Next up is the Napalm Man stage, and I never really liked the name of this boss because it always felt like they could have done something more, I don't know, creative with it, like Tank Man or something like that. Napalm, I don't know, it just wasn't my favorite. But the stage does live up to his name pretty well. There's little fires throughout the entire stage and such as that. And the one thing that doesn't make sense are the tigers. Like, what did tigers have to do with Napalm? I don't know, that's beyond me. When I start the stage off though, I actually get rewarded for my stupidity here. I sort of fall off the edge and I fall down like 3 huge flights, but I'm rewarded with all these items down here. So it worked out pretty well. As I climb up, I take out the tigers and I head on through the stage here. I get to this little part here where there's, you know, fire on the ground, and it's actually really cool because you get to manipulate the environment. You can use Toadman's rain here, and you can actually put out the fires, and it's a cool way to climb these little stairs here. You get to meet Proto-Man, and Proto-Man hasn't been in any of the Game Boy games yet. It's just a little cameo here, but he gives you some cool items. You get to meet him, and of course later on in the game you can do the same mechanic again, where you actually use the rain to put out the fire. And it's like the first time they've done this in any of the Mega Man games, and it's really neat because that's not a feature that's again until Mega Man 7 on the SNES. And so there's so many features in this Game Boy game here that are going to be core staples in the later Mega Man series that all originated in this game. And so I like to sort of see where things begin, and this is really a origin point for a lot of that. Now we also have some cool puzzles in this level, especially with these like giant drills. They're really thick drills, and they come out, and there's a lot of opportunities where you get to ride them across the screen, or you have to be lifted up by them and know when to slide off of them. And some of it's trial and error, I'll acknowledge, but it's really neat to have sort of a difference in gameplay. We're so used to just disappearing platforms, so these moving drills is actually somewhat refreshing. Could they have fit better in the Drill Man stage? Probably, so they probably fit better in the last game, but still a cool little puzzle. Now Napalm Man himself is actually a really cool boss. He's got these cool little, shots he fires out, these little bombs, great little explosions, but honestly he's pretty easy, he's pretty maneuverable here, and you can work through him pretty quickly. Up next is the Stoneman stage, and I always look so forward to this stage on the NES, and it transfers over to the Game Boy pretty darn well as far as most of the aesthetics go. But it's also in this stage, as I was listening to the music, I was like, this song's pretty good, and it was the first time I noticed in the entire game that this song was pretty good. It wasn't a great song, it was pretty good, which led me to realize like the music in this game is nowhere near as solid as any of the other Game Boy games or any of the NES games. I think it's just sort of toned down versions of maybe the Mega Man 4 or 5 soundtrack. I'm not really sure, but it's very forgettable. This is one of the lower soundtracks for the Mega Man games, and they've all been pretty quality so far. Now also in this level we have one of my least favorite little creatures, and it's when you shoot these little guys with the little helmets on. I know there's probably a name for them, I just can't think of it off the top of my head. Usually they just die or they spin around and things like that. They break off into multiple little ones, and I hate it when enemies do this in the games. And I always have trouble with them. At least they don't like hang on to you like doing like Mario 3 where you're trying to jump and you can never jump any higher. So they're not too terrible, but they're still annoying. And of course the mini boss for this stage is a giant hippo, and how that relates to Stoneman, I'm not really sure unless they're just tracing it back to like ancient civilizations that had hippos around. They built most of their civilizations out of stone. That might be the connection, but it seems sort of out of nowhere. It has a cool little mechanic where you have to, destroy his platform where it knocks him down and you can attack the giant hippo. A good little mini boss, but does seem a little bit out of place. And he actually used him twice, and the second time around I didn't have a lot of health when I was fighting him, and I did realize that if you just use Toadstorm here, hey, you can just knock him out no trouble. And you can take all those missiles out, and it's like a super easy boss to go through. And that's also when I realized that Toadstorm can actually be used a lot throughout the game for a lot of situations, and it's a fantastic weapon. Also, as you're journeying through the level here, you're going to notice you're getting a little lazy on the hidden letters. I mean, this letter here was on the main part of the game, on the main path, and you really couldn't avoid it. There were alternate paths to take, but this was on the main path, and it's just sitting there. I wish they'd done a little bit more work on some of the hidden letters, or for the rewards, because I mean, like some of them are really well hidden, and some of them are just like right there. You can't miss them. And I don't really know why they chose the directions for which letters. And when you finally get to Stoneman, he's actually got some pretty neat mechanics here as far as like, shooting out stones at you, or simply being able to crumble into a little pile of stones, being invincible for a little bit. And you can try Napalm Man's weapon on him, and that's the weapon that's supposed to be used on him. But man, I had so much trouble just aiming it at him and getting it to actually explode. To me, using the Mega Buster is the best way to go when you're fighting Stoneman, but it was actually a really difficult fight. And which made me realize like the enemies in this game, as far as like the bosses, are a significant step up from some of the other enemies inside the Mega Man games. A lot of the ones on the Game Boy, the core enemies have been somewhat of a walk in the park, and the levels have been hit and miss. In this game, the levels are, for the most part, pretty easy. Not all of them, but a lot of them are pretty easy, and the bosses are the main challenge inside this game. And I know I got some flack on one of my other Mega Man videos by saying the levels were easy, but when you've played as many Mega Man games as most of us have played, the levels do get easier over time. And I will say, these are easier in this particular game because they give you so many healths throughout the game. I mean, the energy tanks or the health is so plentiful throughout the entire level. Unless you have an instant death, it's going to be harder to die in these levels. But the bosses are significantly harder, but that might be why they give you the store for your P-chips in order to earn energy tanks to help you actually work through the bosses. That's probably what they were doing. Next up is the Chargeman stage, where you do the entire stage on a train, whether you're on top of the train or in the train. There's actually some pretty cool dynamics of going out the train, and inside the train, and outside the train. And it's an enjoyable level, but holy cow, this is like the shortest level in the game. I'd say it's like half as long as any other level in the game. And so when you compare it to the longest level in the game we talked about earlier, it's like a fourth of the length of that one. And so it's extraordinarily short level. And there's not really too much of note, like crazy about this level, except for the chicken boss, which I know is in the core NES game. But holy cow, I've always loved the little chicken boss in these games. It's a shame there was never a chicken man as far as like the enemies in this game. It could have been like that character from Toy Story, or Toy Story 2, I believe it was, where it's like Ed's Toy Barn or whatnot, and just dress up in that chicken suit. That could have been Chicken Man for Mega Man. That was a totally missed opportunity, and maybe Capcom can correct that in Mega Man 12. And as you're going through the level here, like I said, it's pretty short, and so I guess they didn't really have an opportunity to hide the letter very well, but the letter is once again right out there in the open. So much for the challenge of collecting these letters. They're just going to give them to you as you transfer through. And when you finally get to Chargeman, you would think, Chargeman, a train, unstoppable, super fast. This is like the slowest boss in the game, which I'm not complaining about because it's one of the easier ones to actually take down. But they sort of missed their target here as far as like the name to line with the boss. He should not be the slowest boss in the game. So now you defeat all 8 of the Robot Masters and you're ready for the final stages of the game. Now you are going to fight Blade here next, but as soon as you go into this stage, there's an E-Tank like right there. So all I have to do is get the E-Tank, die, have a game over, get another E-Tank, have a game over, and you can fully restock or completely stock out your E-Tanks, get them all 4 filled up. Just a good way to make the game a little bit easier for you as you head into the final parts here. And then you get to Blade, and I'll admit I had a lot of trouble with him until I started using Beat, and I just let Beat do pretty much all the work here. And it made me realize, like, if you used Beat throughout the entire game, I think you would have just been able to dominate the game so much faster and so much easier. But using him here against Blade, excellent strategy. Now when you defeat Blade here, you actually get his weapon, and the weapon would have probably fit better with a Napalm Man stage, or Napalm's weapon, but regardless, it's just another explosive. And you also have this little level here. It's like basically a time level because it's exploding as you try to escape, and you're having to escape through this corridor before the explosions get to you. And it's an entire maze here on how to get out because you have these little tanks that you have to blow up, and if you do blow up the wrong ones, you end up falling through a hole and you blow the entire run. But it's not only it's timed, it's a puzzle. You have to figure out the correct way to go inside the puzzle, which ones to destroy. It's a very challenging stage. It took me multiple tries to get through it, and one of the better stages in the game because once again it mixes that gameplay up a little bit, which this game has been very good about. But it's definitely one of the harder puzzles in Mega Man 4. And of course, once you get out here, you get an awesome little cutscene of Dr. Wily's little space station here. And the game is just phenomenal at cutscenes. And what a great looking space station too. I mean, this just has 90s all over it. And I love the design for it. And of course, the next stage is on top of the space station, keeping up with, once again, the gameplay follows the story for the game, which I think is really cool. And you're on top of the space station here, and at first I was having a little bit of trouble with it, but then I realized if you just simply slide, and you just slide, you can go all the way across the stage here and never get hit. Nothing's faster than your slide, and it's just a straight shot all the way through, and you'll be done at the top of the space station in no time. Now when you get to the end of the space station, before you can go into it, you have this little mini boss here, a giant robot arm that comes out and tries to hit you, and it has a little bubble that pops up here as well that you have to shoot, obviously, and it can actually shoot out a weapon from any of the bosses that you've encountered so far. It's a neat little concept to sort of mix it up a little bit, but not too difficult. Once you get the hang of it, you can pretty much just avoid pretty much every single attack that they throw at you. And then you have another mini boss that's not in any of the Mega Man games, where it's basically this little eyeball and a little fake eyeball, and you have to hit the real eyeball in order for it to take damage. And if you hit the fake eyeball, it shoots a little energy ball at you, and they sort of circle around the level here. It's a fun little mini game, or a fun little mini boss here, and I actually liked it quite a bit. This game has done really well with the mini bosses. I'm not saying all of them match like the levels super well, but it does have a lot of mini bosses in it, and I enjoy mini bosses inside of a game. Now speaking of that mini boss, as soon as you get done with him, you go through a little bit more of the level, and then you get to fight him again, but this time you fight him in a transforming level, and the level keeps shifting its shapes, and it's significantly harder, but still a really fun mini boss battle. They did a fantastic job, like I said, with all these mini bosses. And then after you defeat him, you go into my least favorite part of any Mega Man game, and that's where you fight all of the robot bosses, or all the robot masters, over again. They took this out of Mega Man 3, and I was really glad that they did. And then they added it back into Mega Man 4, and it's probably in Mega Man 5 too. It's just such a staple of the game, and I just don't like it. I don't like going through all the robot bosses. I find it annoying when you're so far into the game and have to go back and redo them all over again, but I may be in the minority on that opinion. And of course, after you defeat him, you go through this little refill station here, and we all know what a refill station means. It means you're at the end of the game, and they want to get all your weapons up to speed so you can actually use them all for the final bosses. And before you get to the final boss, we have yet again another cutscene, and you get a little 2.5D angle cutscene here where Mega Man's coming down, and it makes you think like, I wonder what would happen if they did a Mega Man game in this art style. And then I realized they did Mega Man Battle Network, which sort of is in this art style, and I wondered if this particular scene inspired those Battle Network games. And so once again, Mega Man 4 on the Game Boy is possibly inspiring or leading into other Mega Man projects. It's just so cool to see it that way. And then we're finally at Dr. Wily here, and there are 3 separate stages for Dr. Wily. Stage 1, super easy, just simply hit the little red dot above you. His little hands will come out and stomp and knock things down or try to hit you with his hand. it's actually a pretty little easy stage here. You might end up using the E-Tank, you might not. It's not too bad. Stoneman's weapon helps a lot because you can just sort of use that to sort of reach up there easier, but not too bad of a stage. Stage 2 is when he becomes this, what looks to me like Dr. Robotnik from Sonic. But he basically comes to attack you, he tries to pull you in, and you just simply throw your napalm, or not the napalm, your belade bombs into his mouth there, and it blows up, and it takes a few times going through that. You can't attack him at any other point in the battle except for that one particular part, and when he goes into this stage and you try to like ram into the side of the stage, I don't know how to avoid getting hit at this part, and if you know how to avoid that, let me know in the comments down below, but I have no idea. It's like a guarantee to get hit, and if it is a guarantee to get hit, I'm not a big fan of games that make you get hit in the game, because then people who want to speed run the game and do a no-hit run, they can't do that because of the parts of the stages like this. And then the third stage for Dr. Wily, this is seemingly the most hard stage because he'll shoot these little bombs down and blow up the platform beneath you, and then do it again, and then the whole stage will rotate, and you have to hop over the holes that he's blown in while he's shooting these little balls at you. And I had a lot of trouble the first few times, and then I realized if you stand off to the far left and let him blow up the platform there, jump over just a little bit, blow up another platform, and then you hang off to the right. When he moves off to the right, you don't have to jump over the holes, and all you have to do is shoot straight up with your weapon, and then of course blows him up. You won't get hit really hardly at all, and you have him defeated pretty much first try doing this particular strategy. Once I figured him out doing that, super easy boss and one of the easiest ones in the entire game, but you do have to figure out that strategy in order for that to work so easily. And then of course we have, Dr. Wily doing his little cry fit here like he always does, but he has the ultimate escape because his giant robot arm comes down and just sort of sucks him back off the stage. I mean, it's a comical little ending for him. But you follow up that comic by a massive sacrifice by Belade as you're trying to escape from the space station, which you don't actually get to play the escape scene for this one. But as you're trying to escape, Belade sacrifices himself to blow a hole inside the space station for you to be able to escape and get back into your little rocket ship and get away safely. So the game comes to a close and you've defeated all the main robot masters. Belade has passed away and Dr. Wily is just as large as he ever was. So the overall story of the game really didn't accomplish anything. No one really got truly defeated, but it was still interesting just to have a story inside the game. I mean, it was actually a big plus to know what was going on, especially if you didn't have the manual for the game. And so the credits begin to roll here, and I sort of assumed since we fought the last level outer space in a galaxy, the credits would take place in a galaxy like all the other games have so far. Whether they took place in a galaxy or not is like their trademark end scene for these Mega Man games. And so I kept waiting for the galaxy scene to come around, and it didn't seem like it was going to happen. And they went through these awesome credit scene where they showed all the bosses, all the robot masters and their action and fighting through them. Very cool to see all that. Some of them were a little bit on the long side. I was a little disappointed also they didn't introduce you to all the smaller enemies, but I guess at this point you've seen most of them in some of the other Mega Man games. And then the ending comes and you have this nice little pretty scene here, and I was expecting the galaxy's coming, it's been on all of them, and there was no galaxy. Like, holy cow, this is the first Mega Man game on the Game Boy that did not end in a galaxy scene. And I'm like, come on guys, it was sort of a bait and switch here. You can't give the last level in a galaxy and not do the galaxy scene. I was a little disappointed about that. But let's talk about the pros and cons. The pros here, game had a story, some of the greatest Mega Man mechanics there are. The charge shot was awesome, where it sort of pushed you back a little bit. I also love the P-chip system where you could actually go to a store, you could actually buy things. I also love how they sort of mixed things up with some of the animations here. The cutscenes, that was also amazing to see inside of these games. Some of the robot bosses are some of the best ones in the series. Like, I love Toadman, I love Pharaoh, man. Some of the greatest bosses in the series when it comes to that. I also love the Dr. Wily stages. It's like we actually had Dr. Wily stages instead of just simply like one Dr. Wily stage. It was like an entire level of them, and I liked that as well. But the downside of the game, the soundtrack for this one is the worst of all the ones on the Game Boy so far. Hands down the worst. Some of the enemies in this particular one were some of the worst enemies so far as well. Very forgettable enemies. Like I said, it had some of my favorites in it, but outside of my few favorites, most of the enemies were pretty forgettable inside this game. And some of the levels were also pretty forgettable in the game as well. Yeah, they brought some new mechanics about them, but sometimes they drug on a little bit too long, like the Crystal Man stage. Yeah, it brought in the new mechanic of, the choose your own path, but man, it went on forever, and so you sort of lost that charm because it lasted so long. Also, some of the enemies here, some of the bosses, they felt a little bit on the unbalanced side, because even if you had the enemy weakness, it still seemed a little bit on the hard side. So overall, I mean, when it comes to where would I rank this game, I'd still rank it pretty high to the top of the Mega Man games on the Game Boy, because it felt most like a Mega Man game when it came to overall difficulty, and it also had a lot of modern mechanics from Mega Man in it as well. So I'd actually rank it pretty high. It's like feeling like a Mega Man game and overall fun. I mean, all the cutscenes, all the little, adventure paths, it was a fun game to go through. If you're looking for a definitive Mega Man game, I'm not sure it really replicates the old school style super well, but it definitely begins to show us the new school style of Mega Man really well inside the game. Well, where would you rank this particular game? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, go out there, find a great game to play, just simply have a great rest of the day.